The sun cast long shadows across the dusty platform of Silver Creek Depot as Abigail Knowles clutched her worn leather valise, the realization sinking in that she had been abandoned. The westbound train had departed without her, taking with it her last hope and the man who had promised to marry her. Now, stranded in a town she'd never set foot in before today, Abigail fought back tears as the station master locked the ticket office door. It was April 1876, and the Montana Territory remained as wild and unforgiving as the day settlers first arrived. Abigail had traveled all the way from Boston at the request of Thomas Willingham, a man she'd corresponded with for nearly a year. His letters had painted pictures of a prosperous ranch and a comfortable life awaiting her as his bride. But when she'd stepped off the eastbound train just hours ago, there had been no Thomas to greet her. "Miss, station's closing now," the elderly station master said, jangling his keys impatiently. "Town's just up that road if you're needing a place for the night." Abigail nodded numbly, her thoughts racing. Her remaining money wouldn't cover more than 2 nights at a hotel, and the return fare to Boston was well beyond her means. 23 years old and thoroughly alone, she had never felt more adrift. "Excuse me, madam." A deep voice from behind startled her. "Couldn't help but notice you seemed to be in a difficult situation." She turned to find herself looking up at a tall man with a sun-weathered face partially hidden beneath the brim of a worn Stetson. Dusty trail clothes and spurred boots marked him as a cowboy, while the careful way he held himself suggested a man accustomed to watching his surroundings. "I'm quite all right, thank you," Abigail said automatically, though her voice betrayed her. The man's blue eyes crinkled slightly at the corners as he studied her. "No offense intended, but you don't look all right. I'm Cole Ryder. I ranch about 20 miles west of here." Abigail hesitated, her mother's warnings about strange men echoing in her mind. Yet there was something steady in his gaze that didn't set off her internal alarms. "Abigail Knowles," she finally offered. "And you're right, Mr. Ryder. I find myself in rather unfortunate circumstances." As the sun continued its descent toward the horizon, Abigail reluctantly explained her situation. How Thomas had arranged for her to travel west to marry him, how he'd failed to meet her, and how the westbound train she'd meant to catch to reach his ranch had departed while she waited for him. Cole listened without interruption, his expression darkening when she mentioned Thomas Willingham. "Willingham's ranch went under 6 months ago," he said finally. "Word is he headed to California, left quite a few debts behind." The news hit Abigail like a physical blow. I had no idea." "His last letter arrived only 3 weeks ago." Cole's expression softened. "Some men aren't worth the paper they write on, Miss Knowles." Abigail straightened her shoulders, refusing to let this stranger see how deeply shaken she was. "Yes, well, I suppose I shall need to find employment in town until I can save enough for passage back east." Cole glanced toward town, then back at Abigail. "Silver Creek's not the place for a woman alone. The mining operations bring in rough sorts." As if to emphasize his point, raucous laughter and the tinny sound of a piano floated down from the saloon at the edge of town. Cole seemed to make a decision then. He stepped to the ticket window and rapped sharply. The station master, who had been preparing to leave, opened it with an irritated expression that quickly changed when he saw Cole. "Mr. Ryder, what can I do for you? When's the next train west?" "Tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock." Cole nodded and pulled out a leather wallet. "I'll need a ticket for the lady, to Willow Springs." Abigail started to protest, but Cole held up a hand. "Miss Knowles, my sister runs a boarding house in Willow Springs. She's always looking for help, especially someone with Eastern education. It's respectable work that would let you save for your return to Boston. if that's what you decide." The station master slid a ticket across the counter, and Cole handed it to Abigail. When she hesitated, he added softly, "Your journey doesn't have to end here in disappointment. Sometimes fate has other destinations in mind." "Why would you help me?" Abigail asked, still not taking the ticket. "Because 20 years ago, my mother arrived at this very depot with 3 children and no husband after he was killed in a mining accident. Someone helped her. That's how things work out here. We look after folks who need it." Something in his straightforward manner and the earnestness in his eyes convinced her. She reached for the ticket, her fingers brushing his briefly. "Your journey ends with me," Cole said with a slight smile. "At least for now. I'll escort you to Willow Springs and introduce you to my sister. What happens after that is entirely your choice." As the station master locked up behind them, Abigail walked beside Cole toward the town's only hotel, the weight of abandonment lifting slightly from her shoulders. She had no way of knowing that this unexpected detour would change the course of her life forever. The Silver Creek Hotel was a 3-story wooden structure with peeling white paint and windows that had seen better days. Inside, a threadbare carpet led to a reception desk where a balding man eyed them suspiciously. "Need 2 rooms," Cole said, placing coins on the counter. "The lady will require hot water." The proprietor's expression softened at the sight of money. "Yes, sir. Dining room still open for another hour if you're hungry." After arranging to meet for dinner in 30 minutes, Cole escorted Abigail to her room on the 2nd floor. It was small but clean, with a narrow bed, washstand, and window overlooking the main street. "I'll be next door if you need anything," he said, tipping his hat before leaving her alone. Abigail set down her valise and sank onto the bed, finally allowing herself a moment of vulnerability. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she contemplated how thoroughly her plans had collapsed. After her father's death last year, the family business had been sold to pay debts, leaving her mother dependent on relatives and Abigail seeking a way to support herself. Thomas's proposal had seemed providential. After washing her face and changing into her second-best dress, a navy blue wool with modest lace at the collar, Abigail made her way downstairs. Cole waited in the small dining room, having changed his trail dusty shirt for a clean one. He stood when she entered, pulling out her chair with an unexpected grace. Over a simple meal of beef stew and biscuits, Cole explained more about Willow Springs and his sister Clara's boarding house. "It caters mainly to school teachers, the bank clerk, and other respectable folk. Clara took it over after her husband died of fever 3 years back," he explained. "She mentioned needing someone who could help with the books and perhaps teach piano to some of the town children." "I do play," Abigail admitted. "My mother insisted on musical education." "What else did your Boston upbringing include?" Cole asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. "Literature, mathematics, French, watercolor, painting, all the things supposedly necessary to make a proper wife," she said with a hint of bitterness. Though clearly not how to judge a man's character through his correspondence. Cole studied her for a moment. "Don't be too hard on yourself. Willingham could be charming when it suited him. Half the town invested in his cattle operation before it went bust." "Were you among them?" Abigail asked. "No," Cole said with a small smile. "I've learned to be cautious about men who talk too much about future prospects and not enough about present work." The conversation flowed more easily than Abigail expected. Cole spoke of his ranch, modest but growing, and his plans to expand his horse breeding operation. There was something refreshingly straightforward about him, so different from the flowery prose in Thomas's letters that had, in retrospect, contained very little substance. As they finished their meal, a commotion erupted from the saloon across the street. Shouts and the sound of breaking glass filtered through the hotel windows. "Saturday night," Cole explained with a shrug. "The miners come down from the hills with their week's earnings, and most of it ends up in Jake Hollister's pockets by morning. Hollister owns the saloon, the general store, and most of the mining claims. He's not a man you want to cross." Cole's expression darkened momentarily before he changed the subject. "We should turn in early. Train leaves at 8, and it's best to be at the depot well before then." After bidding her good night at her door, Cole disappeared into his own room. Abigail prepared for bed, her mind swirling with the day's events. As she drifted off to sleep, she found herself thinking not of Thomas's betrayal but of Cole Ryder's unexpected kindness and the journey that awaited her tomorrow. Morning came with the sound of roosters and the early stirrings of town life. Abigail, dressed in her traveling clothes, a practical brown skirt and white shirtwaist, and repacked her valise. She found Cole waiting in the hotel lobby, settled up with the proprietor, and they walked together to the depot. The morning air was crisp, the sky a brilliant blue that seemed to stretch endlessly over the mountain peaks visible in the distance. Silver Creek was beginning to wake up, shopkeepers sweeping their boardwalks and a milk wagon making its rounds. "It's beautiful here," Abigail admitted as they walked. "Different from Boston, certainly, but there's something honest about it." Cole nodded. "That's a good word for it. The territory doesn't pretend to be anything but what it is. Hard sometimes, but straightforward." At the depot, several other passengers already waited for the westbound train. Cole purchased coffee from a vendor's cart and handed a steaming cup to Abigail. "Thank you," she said, grateful for both the warmth and the gesture. "Mr. Ryder, Cole," he interrupted. "Out here formality doesn't last long." "Cole," she amended with a small smile. "I want to thank you for your help. I was rather desperate yesterday." "No need for thanks. As I said, that's how we do things here." The conversation might have continued, but it was interrupted by the distant whistle of the approaching train. As it pulled into the station with a screech of brakes and billowing steam, Abigail felt a curious mix of anxiety and anticipation. This wasn't the journey she had planned, but perhaps it was the one she needed. Cole carried her valise onto the train and found her a seat by the window. As he stowed her bag in the overhead rack, Abigail noticed several people greeting him with respect. "You seem well known," she observed as he sat beside her. "Been in these parts 15 years, he said with a shrug. "My ranch supplies horses to most of the stage lines between here and Helena." The train lurched forward, beginning its westward journey. Abigail watched as Silver Creek gradually disappeared behind them, replaced by rolling grasslands and scattered pine forests. The train wasn't crowded, and most passengers seemed to be businessmen or families rather than the rough types she'd been warned about. "Tell me about your sister," Abigail said after they had been traveling for some time. "Clara's 4 years older than me, stubborn as they come and twice as capable. After her husband died, everyone expected her to sell the boarding house and move back east to her in-laws. Instead, she expanded it." There was unmistakable pride in his voice. "You'll like her, I think. She doesn't stand on ceremony, but she's got a good heart. And she truly needs help. You're not just creating a position out of pity." Cole's expression turned serious. "I wouldn't do that to either of you. Clara mentioned needing someone just last month when I was in town. Your arrival is fortunate timing. The journey to Willow Springs took just over 2 hours." As the train slowed for their destination, Abigail got her first glimpse of the town larger than Silver Creek, with proper streets laid out in a grid and substantial buildings of brick as well as wood. "It's more developed than I expected," she admitted as they gathered her belongings. "The railroad brought prosperity," Cole explained. And unlike Silver Creek, the economy here isn't tied to just mining. There's farming, ranching, and enough commerce to support craftsmen and professionals. The Willow Springs Depot was considerably grander than Silver Creek's, with a proper waiting room and ticket office. As they disembarked, Abigail noticed a tall woman in a practical blue dress waving from the platform. "Clara," Cole said with a warm smile, leading Abigail toward his sister. Clara Ryder Bennett was a handsome woman in her mid-30s, with the same striking blue eyes as her brother but hair several shades darker. She embraced Cole before turning an appraising but kind gaze on Abigail. "So this is your stranded Easterner," she said, her voice warm with good humor. "Welcome to Willow Springs, Miss Knowles. Cole's telegram said you might be interested in a position at my establishment." "Telegram?" Abigail glanced at Cole with surprise. "Sent it this morning before you came down," he explained. "Didn't want to arrive unannounced." Clara linked her arm through Abigail's as they walked from the station. "Cole tells me you're educated, play piano, and need respectable employment. I need someone who can keep books, supervise the housekeeping, and perhaps offer music lessons to supplement their income. It seems Providence has brought us together." The directness of the statement, delivered without artifice, reminded Abigail strongly of Cole. These siblings shared more than just their striking eyes. "I would be most grateful for the opportunity," Abigail responded, finding herself warming to Clara immediately. "Though I should be honest, I have never kept house professionally before." "But I'd wager you ran your family's household back east," Clara said shrewdly. Abigail nodded. After her mother's health had declined following her father's death, she had indeed managed their household until circumstances forced them to give up their home. "That's experience enough to start. The rest you'll learn." Clara patted her arm reassuringly. "Now, Cole will escort us to the boarding house. Then he needs to collect supplies before heading back to his ranch." A flicker of disappointment surprised Abigail at the news Cole would be leaving so soon. She had assumed he would remain in town longer, though she couldn't have explained why this mattered to her. The boarding house stood 3 blocks from the depot, a large 2-story structure with a wide porch and neatly tended flower beds. A painted sign proclaimed it Bennett House, and the freshly whitewashed exterior spoke of careful maintenance. Inside, the entry hall opened to a comfortable parlor on one side and a dining room on the other. Both were furnished simply, but with quality pieces that suggested stability rather than luxury. "We have 8 rooms for permanent boarders," Clara explained as she led them through. "Currently 7 are occupied the bank clerk, our schoolmaster, 2 elderly sisters who used to teach, a young widow who works at the millinery, and 2 gentlemen who work for the railroad company." She showed Abigail to a small but pleasant room at the back of the house that connected to an office space. "These would be your quarters. The previous housekeeper lived here until she married the blacksmith 3 months ago." The room contained a narrow bed, a dresser, a small writing desk, and a window that overlooked a kitchen garden. It was modest but clean, with fresh curtains and a colorful quilt on the bed. "It's lovely," Abigail said sincerely. "The position includes room, board, and $10 a month," Clara continued. "You'd have Sundays free and 1 afternoon each week. If you offer music lessons, that income would be entirely yours." It was a generous arrangement, more than Abigail had dared hope for. She glanced at Cole, who had remained silent during the tour, and found him watching her with an unreadable expression. "I accept with gratitude," she said, turning back to Clara. "When would you like me to begin?" "How about after you've had lunch and settled in?" Clara suggested with a smile. "I'll introduce you to the boarders at dinner this evening." As Clara excused herself to check on the midday meal, Cole lingered in the doorway of what would be Abigail's room. "Will this suit you?" he asked quietly. "It's not Boston, but it's perfect," Abigail interrupted. "Truly." "I cannot thank you enough for your kindness, Mr. Ryder Cole. You've rescued me from what could have been a terrible situation." "I'm glad it's worked out," he said, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Clara's a fair employer and Willow Springs is a good town. You'll be safe here." An awkward silence fell between them, neither quite knowing how to say goodbye after their brief but intense acquaintance. "Will you be returning to town soon?" Abigail finally asked. "Usually come in every few weeks for supplies," Cole answered. "And Clara insists I attend Sunday dinner at least once a month. Then perhaps I'll see you again. Count on it," he said with a smile that transformed his weathered face. "I'd like to hear how you're settling in." With that, he tipped his hat and turned to leave. At the doorway, he paused and looked back. "Remember what I said, Miss Knowles. Your journey doesn't have to end in disappointment." After he'd gone, Abigail sat on the edge of the bed, fingering the train ticket he'd purchased for her. For the first time since discovering Thomas's deception, she felt a glimmer of hope. This wasn't the life she had traveled west to find, but perhaps it could become something even better. The following weeks passed in a blur of new routines and faces. Abigail discovered that her Boston upbringing had indeed prepared her for many aspects of running a boarding house. She could manage accounts, plan meals within a budget, and maintain the standards of cleanliness and decorum that Clara's establishment was known for. The boarders welcomed her with varying degrees of curiosity and warmth. Mr. Peterson, the bank clerk, was formal but unfailingly polite. The schoolmaster, Mr. Harrison, immediately engaged her in discussions of literature that left her intellectually stimulated in a way she hadn't expected to find in Montana territory. The elderly Mrs. Farley fussed over her like additional grandnieces, while Mrs. Winter, the young widow, became a fast friend despite being several years Abigail's senior. Within a month, Abigail had also secured 4 piano students from among the town's more prosperous families, providing her with additional income that she carefully saved. Though she told herself she was saving for a return to Boston, she found herself increasingly content with her new life. Clara proved to be not just a fair employer, but a friend and mentor. In the evenings, after the dinner dishes were cleared and the boarders had retired to the parlor or their rooms, the two women often sat in the kitchen with cups of tea, talking about everything from household management to Clara's experiences as a young bride in the territory. "You know," Clara said one evening in late May, "you're doing remarkably well for someone who expected to be a rancher's wife instead of a housekeeper." Abigail looked up from the mending in her lap with surprise. "How did you know about Thomas?" "Cole told me," Clara admitted. "Not much escapes my brother's notice, and he wanted me to understand your situation fully." "It was foolish of me," Abigail said, feeling her cheeks warm with embarrassment. "Traveling all that way to marry a man I'd never met." "Not foolish," Clara corrected gently. "Brave, perhaps. And optimistic. Those aren't bad qualities, even if this particular venture didn't turn out as planned." Abigail considered this perspective. "I suppose when my father died and we lost our home, I was desperate for security. Thomas's letters painted such a vivid picture of a good life here." "Some men are skilled at painting pictures with words," Clara agreed. "Actions tell the true story." The conversation shifted to other topics, but Clara's words lingered in Abigail's mind, particularly when she thought of Cole Ryder. His actions helping a stranded stranger, ensuring her safety, finding her respectable employment spoke volumes about his character. June arrived with long, warm days and spectacular sunsets that painted the western sky in hues Abigail had never seen in Boston. Her piano student roster had grown to 7, and she found genuine pleasure in teaching music to eager young minds. On Sundays, her day off, she sometimes accompanied the Mrs. Farley to church or explored the town with Mrs. Winter. It was on one such Sunday, nearly 6 weeks after her arrival in Willow Springs, that Abigail encountered Cole again. She was returning from church with the Mrs. Farley when she spotted him emerging from the general store, loading supplies into a wagon. "Mr. Ryder," called Miss Henrietta Farley, waving her handkerchief. At 82, she retained both her enthusiasm and her penchant for matchmaking. "Come say hello to our dear Miss Knowles." Cole looked up, and even from a distance, Abigail could see his face brighten with recognition. He secured his parcels and crossed the street to meet them. "Ladies," he greeted, tipping his hat. "Miss Farley, Miss Gertrude, Miss Knowles, you're looking well." "Thriving, young man," Miss Henrietta declared. "Your sister has found a treasure in Miss Knowles. Why, the boarding house hasn't run this smoothly in years." "I'm glad to hear it," Cole said, his eyes meeting Abigail's. "And how are you finding Willow Springs, Miss Knowles?" "Quite agreeable," she replied, surprised by how genuinely pleased she was to see him. "Your sister has been most welcoming, as have all the residents I've met. Gertrude and I must visit the apothecary," Miss Henrietta announced suddenly. "Miss Knowles, you needn't accompany us if you'd prefer to catch up with Mr. Ryder." The elderly woman's transparent attempt at matchmaking might have been mortifying if Cole hadn't responded with such good humor. "I'd be honored if Miss Knowles would allow me to escort her back to the boarding house," he said. "I'm heading that way to see Clara." With the Mrs. Farley beaming their approval, Abigail found herself walking beside Cole down Willow Springs Main Street. He had trimmed his beard since she'd last seen him, and his Sunday clothes, though not fancy, were neat and well-fitted. "You truly are looking well," Cole observed as they walked. "The territory agrees with you." "It does, surprisingly," Abigail admitted. "I've found purpose here that I didn't expect. Clara writes that you've become indispensable to her." "She exaggerates," Abigail demurred, though she was pleased by the compliment. "But I do enjoy the work, and the boarders have been kind. I've even started teaching piano to some of the town children. I heard Mrs. Prescott at the Mercantile mentioned her daughter is quite taken with her music teacher from Boston." They continued walking, exchanging news and observations about town happenings. Cole told her about his ranch, the new foals born that spring, the expanded grazing land he'd fenced, his plans for breeding stock horses specifically for the territory's conditions. "You speak of your ranch with such passion," Abigail noted. "It's clear you love your work." "I do," he acknowledged. "There's satisfaction in building something with your own hands, watching it grow year by year." As they approached the boarding house, Abigail realized she was reluctant for their conversation to end. "Will you stay for dinner? Clara always prepares something special on Sundays." "That's my plan," Cole confirmed. "Though I need to head back to the ranch before dark. One of my hands is down with a broken leg, so we're short-handed." Sunday dinner at Bennett House was always a social affair, with the boarders gathering in the dining room for Clara's roast chicken or beef. Today was no exception, with conversation flowing freely around the large table. Cole sat between Clara and Abigail, fitting comfortably into the household dynamic. Abigail observed how the other boarders respected him, seeking his opinion on matters from town politics to the railroad's expansion plans. He spoke thoughtfully, without bombast or exaggeration, so different from the men she had known in Boston society, who often seemed to speak merely to hear themselves talk. After dinner, while the boarders retired to the parlor for coffee, Cole helped Abigail and Clara clear the dishes, a gesture that seemed entirely natural to him, but would have shocked the gentleman of Abigail's acquaintance back east. "You've made quite an impression on our boarders," Clara teased as they worked in the kitchen. "Miss Henrietta asked me just yesterday when you might next visit." "Did she now?" Cole raised an eyebrow, glancing at Abigail with amusement. "And what did you tell her?" "That you're a busy rancher with little time for social calls," Clara replied, "but that you never miss a chance to see your favorite sister." "My only sister," he corrected with a grin. The easy banter between the siblings made Abigail smile, though it also stirred a pang of homesickness for her own family. Her mother's last letter had been hopeful, but tinged with worry about Abigail's situation. She had yet to fully explain the circumstances that had led her to Willow Springs rather than Thomas Willingham's ranch. As Cole prepared to leave, Abigail walked with him to the front porch. The June evening was mild, with fireflies beginning to sparkle in the gathering dusk. "Thank you for dinner," Cole said, his hat in his hands. "And for the conversation. It's mostly horses and cattle at the ranch, not much opportunity for discussing literature or music." "You're always welcome here," Abigail said, then added more personally, "I enjoyed seeing you again." Something shifted in his expression, a softening around the eyes, a slight curve of his lips. "I was thinking of coming into town for the 4th of July celebration next month. The town council puts on quite a show, fireworks, dancing, the works." "It sounds wonderful," Abigail said, genuinely interested. "Would you consider—" Cole hesitated, then continued with careful deliberation, "would you consider attending the dance with me? As my guest?" The invitation surprised her, though perhaps it shouldn't have. There had been something growing between them, something she hadn't fully acknowledged until this moment. "I would be delighted," she answered, a warm flutter rising in her chest. Cole's smile broadened. "Then I'll look forward to it." He placed his hat on his head and tipped the brim. "Until July, Miss Knowles." As she watched him ride away, Abigail realized that for the first time since arriving in Montana territory, she was anticipating the future with genuine excitement rather than trepidation. The weeks leading up to Independence Day brought increasingly warm weather and bustling activity in Willow Springs. The town council, determined to create a celebration worthy of the nation's centennial, planned an elaborate day of festivities that would culminate in a grand dance at the newly completed town hall. Abigail found herself caught up in the excitement. With Clara's encouragement, she used some of her savings to purchase fabric for a new dress, a sky blue cotton with white trim, that Mrs. Winter helped her fashion into a style both fashionable and appropriate for a frontier celebration. "Cole won't be able to take his eyes off you," Clara predicted as Abigail tried on the nearly completed dress. "Blue suits you brings out the warmth in your complexion." "Clara," Abigail protested, feeling her cheeks warm, "your brother has merely been kind to a stranger in need." "My brother," Clara replied with knowing eyes, "has ridden into town 3 times since your arrival, more than he typically visits in 6 months. And each time he's found reason to call at the boarding house." This was true. Cole had indeed visited twice more since the Sunday dinner, once ostensibly to discuss boarding a business associate who would be visiting in the fall, and again to deliver a book on piano instruction that he'd purchased in Helena during a business trip. Each visit had deepened Abigail's appreciation for his steady character and thoughtful conversation. Unlike Thomas's flowery letters, Cole's words carried weight precisely because he used them sparingly and with purpose. On the morning of July 4th, 1876, Willow Springs awoke to the sound of firecrackers and excited children. American flags hung from nearly every building along Main Street, and bunting in red, white, and blue, draped the town hall's entrance. The boarding house served an early breakfast to accommodate those eager to witness the parade scheduled for 10 o'clock. Abigail, having risen before dawn to help Clara prepare a special meal, found herself watching the street with anticipation, wondering when Cole might arrive. He appeared just as breakfast concluded, looking more polished than Abigail had yet seen him. He wore a proper suit coat over a crisp white shirt, his boots freshly polished, his hair neatly trimmed. "Miss Knowles," he greeted her warmly. "I hope I'm not too early." "Not at all," she assured him, suddenly conscious of her work apron and practical morning dress. "I just need a few minutes to change." "Take your time," Cole said, settling in to chat with Mr. Peterson and the other boarders. "The parade won't start for another hour." Upstairs in her room, Abigail changed into her new blue dress with trembling fingers. She arranged her honey brown hair in a becoming style, with soft curls framing her face, and added a touch of rose water, her one luxury brought from Boston. When she descended the stairs, conversation in the parlor faltered. Cole stood immediately, his expression making her glad of every stitch sewn into the new dress. "You look beautiful," he said simply. The day unfolded like a series of vivid paintings in Abigail's memory afterward. The parade with its marching band and veterans from both the Mexican and Civil Wars. Children running with streamers and small flags. A community picnic in the town square, where Cole introduced her to countless neighbors and friends, his hand often resting lightly at the small of her back as they navigated the crowds. Throughout the afternoon, Abigail noticed something shifting between them, a growing ease, a sense of belonging together that felt both novel and somehow inevitable. Cole was attentive without being possessive, considerate without being condescending. When she expressed interest in the horse auction taking place near the livery, he explained the finer points of equine bloodlines without talking down to her. As dusk approached, they returned to the boarding house briefly for Abigail to freshen up before the dance. In the parlor, Cole spoke quietly with Clara while Abigail changed her shoes and added a light shawl against the evening air. "Your sister seems to approve of our outing," Abigail observed as they walked toward the town hall, where lanterns were already being lit for the evening festivities. "Clara approves of you," Cole corrected. "She thinks you're the best thing to happen to her establishment in years." "And what do you think, Mr. Ryder?" Abigail asked, surprising herself with her boldness. Cole stopped walking and turned to face her, his expression serious in the golden light of sunset. "I think you're the best thing to happen to Willow Springs and to me in a very long time." The candor of his statement left her momentarily speechless. Before she could formulate a response, the first brilliant burst of fireworks exploded overhead, drawing gasps from the crowd gathering near the town hall. "Come on," Cole said, offering his arm. "Let's get a better view." The fireworks display was spectacular rockets and Roman candles, painting the dark Montana sky with ephemeral blossoms of light. Standing beside Cole in the warm July night, Abigail felt a sense of rightness that had eluded her in Boston society drawing rooms and even in her correspondence with Thomas. When the display concluded, they joined the townspeople streaming into the hall for the dance. The large room had been transformed with bunting and lanterns, a raised platform at one end accommodating a small orchestra of local musicians. "May I have this dance?" Cole asked as the musicians struck up a waltz. "You may," Abigail replied, placing her hand in his. Cole proved to be a surprisingly graceful dancer, guiding her confidently through the waltz. "Where did a rancher learn to dance so well?" she asked, genuinely curious. "My mother insisted," he explained with a smile. said no son of hers would stomp around a dance floor like a startled buffalo, no matter how far west we moved. The evening progressed with more dances, conversation with townspeople, and refreshments served by the Ladies' Aid Society. Throughout it all, Abigail was aware of Cole's steady presence, his quiet attentiveness, the way his eyes sought hers across the room when they were momentarily separated. As midnight approached and the celebration began to wind down, Cole suggested they step outside for fresh air. The night had cooled considerably, and Abigail drew her shawl more tightly around her shoulders as they walked to a small garden adjacent to the town hall. "Cold?" Cole asked, noticing her movement. "A little," she admitted. Without hesitation, he removed his jacket and draped it over her shoulders. The warmth of it, carrying his scent of clean linen and the faintest hint of leather, enveloped her like an embrace. "Better. Much," she said softly. "Thank you for today, Cole. It's been wonderful." He guided her to a bench beneath a cottonwood tree, where lantern light from the hall cast dappled patterns through the leaves. For a moment, they sat in comfortable silence, listening to the music drifting from inside and the distant sounds of celebratory firecrackers still being set off by enthusiastic townspeople. "Abigail," Cole began, using her given name for the first time. "I hope you know how much I've enjoyed your company these past months." "As I have yours," she responded, her heart quickening at the serious note in his voice. "When I found you at that depot in Silver Creek, I thought I was just helping someone in need." He turned slightly to face her more directly. "I had no idea you would become so important to me so quickly." Abigail swallowed, her throat suddenly tight with emotion. "I came west expecting one life and found something entirely different. Are you disappointed?" he asked, a rare vulnerability in his question. "No," she answered truthfully. "How could I be? Thomas offered pretty words with nothing behind them. You've offered me kindness, respect, and—" She hesitated, uncertain how to name the growing feeling between them. "And my heart," Cole finished quietly, "if you want it." The directness of his declaration took her breath away. This was no flowery proposal like Thomas's letters, but something far more substantial and honest offering from a man who meant exactly what he said. "Cole," she whispered, her hand finding his in the darkness. "I do want it. Very much." His fingers tightened around hers, and in the soft light filtering through the leaves, his eyes searched her face. "May I kiss you, Abigail?" In answer, she leaned toward him, closing the distance between them. His lips met hers with gentle pressure, a first kiss that held both tenderness and promise. When they parted, Abigail felt as though something fundamental had shifted in her world, as if all the disappointments and detours had led precisely to this moment, this man. "Your journey ends with me," Cole murmured, echoing his words from their first meeting. "That's what I said at the depot, and I meant it. Not as an ending, but as a beginning." The remainder of summer passed in a haze of happiness for Abigail. While she continued her duties at the boarding house, Cole visited Willow Springs more frequently, sometimes staying in town overnight when business required it, other times riding out specifically to see her. They established a routine of Sunday afternoon rides, with Cole teaching Abigail to handle a gentle mare he kept stabled in town for her use. These excursions allowed them privacy away from the well-meaning but curious eyes of the boarding house residents and townspeople. During one such ride in late August, they stopped at a meadow overlooking a winding creek, the grasslands golden in the late summer light. While their horses grazed nearby, Cole and Abigail sat on a blanket he'd brought, sharing the picnic Clara had prepared. "I had a letter from my mother yesterday," Abigail said as they finished the apple tarts that were Clara's specialty. "She's finally coming to understand why I've decided to stay." "And why is that?" Cole asked, his eyes crinkling with the smile that had become so dear to her. "I told her I've found purpose here, and happiness." Abigail hesitated, then added more softly, "and love." Cole reached for her hand, his expression growing serious. "I have something I want to show you today if you're willing to ride a bit farther." Curious, Abigail agreed readily. They packed up their picnic and mounted their horses, with Cole leading the way along a ridge that offered spectacular views of the surrounding countryside. After about 20 minutes, they crested a hill, and Cole reined his horse to a stop. Below them lay a small valley, protected from the prevailing winds by gentle slopes. A clear stream bisected lush pastureland, and near its bank stood the framework of a house under construction. "What is this place?" Abigail asked, taking in the peaceful beauty of the setting. "My new homestead," Cole replied. "I purchased the land last year but only started building this summer." "It's beautiful," she said sincerely, "but I thought your ranch was 20 miles from Silver Creek." "It is. This is different." He guided his horse down the slope with Abigail following. As they approached the partially built structure, she could see it was substantial. The foundation and framing suggested a house with at least 6 rooms. "This will be my home," Cole explained as they dismounted. "Close enough to Willow Springs for convenient trips to town, but with enough land for horses and a small cattle operation." Abigail walked around the construction site, noting the careful workmanship of the timber frame. "It's going to be lovely. When do you expect it to be finished?" "By winter, if the weather holds." Cole watched her examine the house with a curious intensity. "What do you think of it?" "I think it's perfect," she said honestly. "The location, the design, all of it." Cole took a deep breath as if gathering his courage. "I hoped you would say that." "Because I built it with you in mind, Abigail." She turned to him, startled. "With me?" "From that first day at the depot, something told me you were special," he said, closing the distance between them. "Each time I've seen you since, I've become more certain of it." He took her hands in his blue eyes earnest in the afternoon sunlight. "I know it's been only a few months, but I've never been more sure of anything in my life. I love you, Abigail Knowles. I want to build a life with you if you'll have me." Her heart seemed to pause, then race forward. "Are you asking what I think you're asking?" In answer, Cole reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. Opening it, he revealed a ring with a modest diamond flanked by 2 sapphires that matched the color of his eyes. "I'm asking you to marry me," he said simply. "To make this house a home with me." Tears blurred Abigail's vision as emotion welled up inside her. "Yes," she whispered, then more strongly, "Yes, Cole Ryder, I will marry you." His face transformed with joy as he slipped the ring onto her finger. Then he gathered her into his arms, lifting her off her feet in an embrace that expressed all the happiness words couldn't contain. "When?" she asked breathlessly when he set her down. "When shall we marry?" "As soon as the house is finished," he suggested. "October, perhaps." "Unless you'd prefer to wait longer." Abigail shook her head, laughing. "October is perfect. I've already waited long enough for happiness." Their engagement announcement caused a stir of excitement in Willow Springs. Clara was delighted, confessing she had hoped for this outcome since Cole first described the stranded Boston lady he'd met at Silver Creek Depot. The boarding house residents offered congratulations, with the Mrs. Farley taking particular pride in having recognized the match's potential from the beginning. Preparations for both the wedding and their new home occupied the following weeks. Abigail divided her time between her duties at the boarding house, sewing for her trousseau, and occasional visits to the homestead to consult on furnishings and finishes. Cole threw himself into completing the house, often working alongside the carpenters after tending to his ranch responsibilities. In late September, Abigail received an unexpected letter not from her mother, but from Thomas Willingham. Postmarked from San Francisco, it contained a belated explanation and apology for his failure to meet her at Silver Creek. His ranch had indeed failed, he explained, and he had fled west rather than face his creditors. Now established in California, he wondered if Abigail might reconsider their arrangement. She read the letter twice, marveling at how little it affected her. The man who had once seemed to offer her future now appeared as a distant figure, irrelevant to the life she was building. That evening, she showed the letter to Cole as they sat on the boarding house porch after dinner. "Are you tempted?" he asked after reading it, his tone light but his eyes watchful. "Not in the slightest," Abigail assured him, taking the letter back and deliberately tearing it in half. "The best thing Thomas Willingham ever did for me was fail to meet that train. It led me to you." Cole's smile held both relief and tenderness. "I've thought the same thing many times. If I hadn't gone to Silver Creek that day for supplies." "Providence," Abigail said, echoing Clara's earlier assessment. "Some journeys take unexpected turns for the best of reasons." October arrived with crisp mornings and foliage painted in brilliant hues of gold and crimson. The house was completed ahead of schedule, allowing Cole and Abigail time to furnish it before their wedding day. Clara contributed linens and kitchen necessities, while Cole's ranch hands crafted sturdy furniture from local timber. As a wedding gift, the townspeople of Willow Springs pooled resources to purchase a new piano for the couple's parlor, a gesture that moved Abigail to tears when it was delivered. She had mentioned to Mrs. Winter how much she missed having an instrument of her own, never expecting such generosity from her new community. On October 15, 1876, Abigail Knowles and Cole Ryder were married in Willow Springs' small church, with Clara standing as Abigail's attendant and Cole's foreman as his best man. Abigail wore a gown of ivory silk that Mrs. Winter and the Mrs. Farley had helped her create, with lace from her mother's wedding dress incorporated into the bodice. The ceremony was followed by a celebration at their new home, where neighbors and friends gathered to wish them well. As twilight descended, lanterns illuminated the yard, and impromptu dancing began when Mr. Harrison produced his fiddle. Standing with Cole on the porch of their new home, watching their friends and neighbors celebrate, Abigail felt a contentment that surpassed anything she had imagined when boarding that eastbound train in Boston months ago. "Happy?" Cole asked, his arm around her waist. "Completely," she answered, leaning against his solid strength. "I came west seeking security and found so much more. And I went to a train depot to buy supplies and found my heart," he replied, bending to kiss her softly. As their guests called for the newlyweds to join the dancing, Abigail reflected on the strange twist of fate that had left her alone at Silver Creek Depot. What had seemed a disaster had proven to be the beginning of her true journey, one that had indeed ended with Cole Ryder, just as he had promised. Not in disappointment, but in joy beyond measure. 2 years later, on a bright spring morning in 1878, Abigail sat on the front porch of their home, watching Cole work with a spirited young colt in the corral nearby. Their daughter, Elizabeth Clara Ryder, named for both their mothers, played contentedly in a basket beside her, her 6-month-old hands reaching for a wooden toy her father had carved. The ranch had prospered under Cole's careful management, with his reputation for quality horses spreading throughout the territory. Abigail had continued teaching piano to a select number of students who traveled to their home for lessons, and she maintained close ties with Clara and their friends in Willow Springs. Life wasn't without challenges the harsh Montana winters, occasional disputes with neighboring ranchers over water rights, the ordinary difficulties of building a life far from the comforts of Eastern civilization. But Abigail faced each challenge with the same spirit that had helped her overcome her abandonment at Silver Creek Depot. As she watched Cole approach the house, his face lighting with love at the sight of his wife and daughter, Abigail reflected on how thoroughly her expectations had been transformed. She had come west seeking a husband and security, imagining herself as a rancher's wife. That part had come true, but in a way far richer and more meaningful than her correspondence with Thomas Willingham had ever suggested. Cole climbed the porch steps and bent to kiss her, then lifted their daughter high in the air, eliciting delighted giggles. "The Wilsons just rode in," he said, settling beside Abigail with Elizabeth on his knee. "They brought mail from town. There's a letter from your mother." Abigail accepted the envelope eagerly. Her mother had finally visited the previous summer, staying for 6 weeks and departing with a much improved opinion of Montana territory and a deep appreciation for her son-in-law. Opening the letter, Abigail read quickly, then looked up with excitement. "Mother's coming again. She'll arrive in June and stay through August." "That's wonderful news," Cole said sincerely. "Elizabeth will be old enough to truly get to know her grandmother this time. And perhaps meet her new brother or sister," Abigail added softly, placing a hand over her still flat stomach. Cole's expression transformed with wonder. "Abigail, are you certain?" She nodded, joy bubbling up inside her. "Dr. Morgan confirmed it yesterday when I was in town. We'll welcome another little rider around Christmas." Cole gathered her close, their daughter nestled between them. "I never imagined such happiness was possible," he murmured against her hair. "Nor did I," Abigail admitted. "When I stood alone at that depot, watching my plans crumble, I thought my journey had ended in failure. Instead, it was just beginning." Cole's arms tightened around her. "Your journey ends with me," he repeated, the words that had once been a promise now a fulfilled reality. As the spring breeze carried the scent of wildflowers and the sound of their daughter's laughter, Abigail Knowles Ryder knew with absolute certainty that her journey had indeed ended exactly where it was meant to, in the arms of the man who had seen her value when she was nothing more than a stranded stranger, and in the home they had built together on the Montana frontier. The journey that had begun in disappointment had led to a destination far beyond anything she could have imagined, a life filled with purpose, community, family, and a love that grew stronger with each passing season. What had seemed an ending at Silver Creek Depot had proven to be the most beautiful beginning of all.